My name is Kelly, and his name is John. We met right after graduating from college, and then it seemed to me that fate had given me something truly valuable, real, and eternal. He captivated me with his charm, self-confidence, and, of course, the very ambitions that emanated from him in a continuous stream, like a stormy river sweeping away all obstacles in its path. Even before I realized how deeply I had plunged into this whirlpool of feelings, we were already standing in front of the altar, saying vows that, as it seemed to me at the time, would be indestructible until the end of our days. We got married, and our new home, a small but cozy apartment that John bought before the wedding, became the place where I believed our happy life would begin. Although there was nothing special about it, standard white walls, a small kitchen with a worn table, a couple of rooms, one of which soon turned into a nursery, I loved every detail of it, every corner, every ray of sunlight penetrating through the curtains in the morning. This house was our refuge, a place where dreams were born and plans were made, a place where our daughter's soft, melodious crying was soon heard for the first time. Sarah was born so tiny, so defenseless, but at the same time, even then, she felt the strength that she inherited from both of us. She combined my thick curly hair with John's blue eyes like a spring sky, and every time I looked at her, I thought that we had everything we needed to be happy. A loving family, a cozy home, and a job that, even if it didn't bring huge incomes, I liked. I got a job as a secretary in a small but promising company, and even though the salary wasn't high, it didn't bother me. I liked the team, I liked the feeling of stability, the opportunity to leave home, to feel like a part of something bigger. John was building a career in a construction company, and every evening, when he came home, he enthusiastically told me about new projects, complex but interesting deals, and how soon everything would change for the better. I was proud of him, and I listened to him with genuine interest, even if his long working hours meant I was increasingly alone with Sarah. But then it seemed to me that it wasn't scary, because he was doing it for us, for our future. However, something has changed over time. John came home late, but he was no longer in a hurry to share his news. There was something new and disturbing in his gaze, distrust, suspicion, as if he saw me in a different light, in a light that I was not familiar with. His questions changed. "Who called?" he demanded, looking at me as if I had just hidden something important from him. "Why are you dressed up like that?" His voice was strained, cold, so alien. At first, I laughed at it, trying to convince myself that it was just fatigue, just a difficult period. But every day his jealousy became more unbearable. Quarrels broke out over small things, escalating into hours of strained silence filled with hidden accusations and understatement. One night, after a particularly hard day, when I returned from a work event, John greeted me not with words of greeting, but with a steady, prickly look in which only one emotion was read: doubt. "Do you think I'm cheating on you?" I asked, trying to laugh, but my voice faltered because I knew the answer wasn't going to be the way I wanted it to be. "Don't pretend to be an idiot, Kelly. I see the way men look at you." His words were cold, devoid of the tenderness that once filled our lives. "John, for God's sake, I'm your wife. I love you." I tried to reach him. I tried to break down this invisible wall that was growing between us. But my words were lost in the void. The quarrels became more frequent, each of them destroying our marriage, like drops of water falling on a stone, which eventually leave deep cracks in it. I was loyal to him, always have been, always will be, but his suspicions penetrated into all corners of our lives, turning into poison, poisoning every day, every minute, every word. Sarah, fortunately, remained blissfully unaware, although I understood that children always feel more than we think. At the age of 10, her world revolved around her school friends and her favorite tablet games, and I did everything I could to protect her from our quarrels. But the irony did not escape me. John was the one who came home late, who went on business trips, who was so absorbed in work that he could even miss his daughter's birthday. If anyone had any reason to be suspicious, it was me. But I trusted him. I believed in our vows, in the love that bound us on our wedding day. Why couldn't he do the same? One night, lying in bed next to John, I stared at the ceiling for a long time, listening to his measured breathing. I couldn't sleep. The room, once cozy and filled with warmth, now seemed strange, cold, empty to me. How did we get to this point? When did love turn into suspicion and trust into accusation? I thought about leaving, taking Sarah and starting over, but where? What kind of life could I give her on my small salary? And despite all the pain, despite everything that happened between us, I still loved John. I loved the man he was. Someone he could become again. But just when it seemed to me that things couldn't get any worse, life struck again. My mother, my strongest bulwark, my hope and support, my safe haven in the storms of life, she suffered a stroke. It happened suddenly, out of the blue, leaving me confused and afraid. Mom was always strong, energetic, and tireless. After her father's death, she found solace in gardening, in books, in socializing with friends, not allowing herself to give up. I always thought that she was invulnerable, that she would be there no matter how many years passed. But fate decreed otherwise. She lived in this magnificent house in a fashionable part of the city, where every house was like an illustration of an ideal life that had come off the pages of a magazine: manicured lawns, massive oak doors, vintage mailboxes, and cars sparkling in the sun, as if they had just rolled off an assembly line. Thanks to Dad's life insurance and his smart investments, Mom could afford not to worry about money, and I always joked that she was living the life of a retired movie star, even though deep down I knew that behind the veneer there was a loneliness that she would never admit out loud. But that Tuesday morning changed everything. I was sitting at my desk, looking through papers, when the phone rang, and instead of the usual call from my mother, filled with warmth and calm, I heard someone else's cautious voice. The woman on the other end of the line introduced herself as an emergency room nurse and quickly, clearly, and without unnecessary words said that Mom couldn't speak, couldn't move the left side of her body. Something clicked in my head, my heart clenched with panic, and, forgetting everything, I grabbed my bag, rushed out of the office and rushed to the hospital, feeling my breathing getting heavier and my fear getting sharper with every turn of the road. The next few weeks turned into a blur, where one day smoothly flowed into another, leaving no room for rest or hope. The hospital corridors, the monotonous voice of the doctors, the smell of antiseptic that had seeped into my skin, and the endless conversations about prognosis, rehabilitation, and medications, it all seemed like a surreal dream from which I could not wake up. I went to all the first-class clinics in the area, desperately hoping to find a doctor who would tell me that everything would be fine with my mother, that it was only a matter of time, but the prognosis was disappointing. A stroke left her bedridden, requiring constant care. I was stunned, confused, not knowing how to deal with everything at once. Taking care of my mom, my job, Sarah's upbringing, and my strained relationship with John all fell on me at once, crushing me like a multi-ton lump, making it impossible to breathe. It felt like I was drowning, but not fast, but slowly, in slow motion, watching my life crumble, and not having the strength to change anything. It was at this point that John suddenly came up with an idea that turned everything around. "We should move into your mom's house," he said one evening over dinner, picking at a plate of pasta with a fork. I raised my head, almost choking, and stared at him in amazement. "What?" He put down his fork and, leaning towards me, spoke with that twinkle in his eyes that always appeared when he was sure of his idea. "Think about it, Kelly. It's a great house, in a posh neighborhood. Sarah will have her own room, maybe even a playroom." He spoke enthusiastically, as if he had already made a decision for both of us. "Your mom needs care, and you'll be there. Plus we can rent out our apartment. That's extra money. Isn't that perfect?" I had to admit that his words made sense. My mom's house was really better than our apartment, and the idea that I wouldn't have to be torn between hospital, work, and home seemed tempting. But something inside me resisted the idea. "I do not know, John," I hesitated, trying to put my thoughts together. "This is Mom's house. This is her personal space. We can't just barge in there like it belongs to us now." John didn't give up. Ask her, he insisted. I'm sure she'll like the idea, because it's better than a nursing home, right? He was right. Mom said more than once that she would never agree to spend the rest of her life in a place that she called a prison for the elderly. The next day, I cautiously started a conversation, not knowing what reaction to expect, but to my surprise, my mother's face lit up with a faint but sincere smile. "Oh, Kelly," she said, her voice low but filled with joy. "I would really like this old house to be filled with life again." So it was decided. When I started packing in our apartment, I had a strange feeling that I was standing on the threshold of something huge, something that could turn our lives around. I just didn't know if it would be a change for the better. John was over the moon. He kept talking about the garden he was going to put in the yard, the workshop he was going to build in the basement, and how he was going to decorate the living room. And listening to him, I couldn't figure out if he was really happy about our move, or if he was just trying to convince himself of it. Even Sarah seemed pleased, imagining how she would decorate her new, much larger room. But moving to my mom's house brought not only convenience, but also a lot of new challenges that I wasn't ready to face. Caring for a stroke patient wasn't just difficult, it was a full-time job that required patience, knowledge, and emotional endurance, which I simply didn't have enough of. I didn't sleep at night, waking up to every moan of my mother. Every morning began with procedures, medications, attempts to help her move, and ended with a feeling of complete helplessness. A week later, exhausted, not getting enough sleep, and on the verge of a nervous breakdown, I realized that I couldn't handle it anymore. Then I made a decision that was supposed to make my life easier, but led to completely unexpected consequences. I hired a nurse to help me during the day. Nurse Jenny was a real godsend, a salvation that came at a time when I no longer knew how to cope with all the responsibilities that had fallen on me. Every morning at 8 o'clock sharp, she entered the house, always collected, with an invariably gentle smile, ready to patiently and carefully take care of my mother, making it easier for me to do at least some of this exhausting work. She stayed until 6 in the evening, performing all the basic procedures. She helped her mother with hygiene, monitored her diet, gave massages so that her muscles would not atrophy, gave medications on time, talked to her, although the stroke left a heavy imprint on her mother's speech, and it was difficult for her to speak. The evenings and nights remained entirely on me, and when I came home after work exhausted, I was just starting my second shift as a nurse, torn between my daughter's duty and the endless desire to just close my eyes for a minute and allow myself a little rest. Mom hardly spoke. It angered her, upset her, made her withdrawn, and most of the time she just remained silent, staring at one point, while I, trying to preserve the remnants of her dignity, changed her diapers, then sponged, wiped her weakened body with a damp warm cloth, slowly massaged her arms and legs, helped to do at least a few movements to prevent the joints from becoming completely rigid. I knew she hated it all, hated her helpless state, hated that I saw her like this, but I didn't say anything because it hurt me to see my once energetic, independent, strong mother turning into a shadow of herself. It broke my heart, but I kept going, day after day, because I knew if it were the other way around, she would have done the same for me. What I didn't expect was Sarah's reaction. It seemed to me that at the age of 11, she was already old enough to understand what was going on, maybe even help, bring her mother water, talk to her, just be there, but I was cruelly mistaken. One evening, when I was walking into my mom's room with a tray with a mug of tea and a plate of light dinner on it, I noticed Sarah darting down the hall, holding her nose with her palm, clearly avoiding looking towards my grandmother's door. "Sarah," I called out to her, stopping. "Where are you going? Do you want to come in and say hello to Grandma?" She froze for a second, then abruptly shook her head, and an expression of disgust appeared on her face. "No. It smells awful in there." I felt the blood rush to my cheeks, not from shame, but from an unexpected blow to the most painful spot. "Sarah, you can't say that." My voice was firm, but there was bitterness in it. "Grandma needs our support now." "I don't care," she snapped, staggering back. She's disgusting. I don't want to go in there. I barely had time to open my mouth to say something, but Sarah had already turned around and ran into her room, slamming the door so loudly that the sound echoed through the house. I was left standing in the hallway, stunned, offended, not understanding where my sweet, caring little girl had gone, the one who had recently listened with delight to her grandmother's stories, the one who hugged her before going to bed. I turned to John for support, hoping that he would help me find an approach to Sarah, explain to her why it was important for all of us to be by her side at this difficult moment, but whenever I brought it up, he just shrugged and replied indifferently. Not my problem. John, but this is your family. I could feel the irritation and resentment boiling in me. I didn't sign up for this, Kelly. And that was the most painful thing. Deep down, I knew it wasn't his fault, because really none of us had signed up for this. No one expected life to change so dramatically, but it was unbearably bitter to see him, after spending the day at work, playing video games with Sarah or taking her for ice cream while I was in It's My Mom's time. I check her medication schedule. I persuade her to eat at least a few spoonfuls of soup. I couldn't help but feel hurt as I watched them laughing together in the living room, hunched over textbooks at the kitchen table, discussing school assignments, and while part of me was glad that they had such a strong relationship, the other part felt increasingly lonely. 2 years passed like this, 2 long years in a fog of bed linen, medications, lack of sleep and fatigue, which turned into a constant background of my life. Mom's condition stabilized, but she still needed constant care, and even though I was exhausted to the limit, I found a rhythm, learned to live in this new reality. And then on one ordinary Tuesday, everything fell apart. I was just changing my mom's bedclothes when the phone rang. Rolling over the bed, I grabbed the phone and, wiping beads of sweat from my forehead, pressed the answer button. Hello? Kelly, dear. I immediately recognized the voice of Mrs. Peterson, our old neighbor in the apartment complex. Her voice sounded worried, and it seemed to me that she was hesitating, not knowing whether to say what she was going to say. Is something wrong? I tensed, feeling unease rise in my chest. I don't know if I should get involved, but I thought you should know. Pause. Then she sighed heavily and, lowering her voice, said, I quite often see John in the company of young women. Different. Always very beautiful. I froze, feeling my neighbor's words penetrate my brain like cold blades, and I can neither throw them out, nor deny them, nor even fully comprehend them. Thanks, I said mechanically, and hung up. My mind was filled with anxiety. That night, when I finally came face to face with John, when all the rumors and suspicions turned into indisputable facts, I hoped to the last that he would come up with a plausible explanation, that he would convince me that it was all just a ridiculous coincidence. Oh, they're just potential tenants, he said too smoothly, with that serene confidence that once seemed like a sign of his strength to me, but now looked like a habitual lie. I'm showing them the apartment. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe him. I wanted to convince myself that Mrs. Peterson was just imagining things, that I was exaggerating, that John was really just trying to find new tenants. But doubts had already taken root and began to grow inside me like weeds, filling every thought, every look, every pause between his words. And then, a week later, I found a lipstick stain. I saw him by chance when I was putting his shirts in the laundry basket, which he never bothered to put away himself. There was a perfect scarlet mark on the collar of the snow-white fabric, clear, precise, like the imprint of a kiss. I froze, feeling my heart stop in my chest, and then beat with a vengeance. My hand was shaking as I held the shirt up to the light, trying to convince myself that it was just a pen mark, just a drop of ketchup or wine, but deep down I knew it wasn't. I didn't need more proof, but I was looking for it anyway. I waited for his next business trip to make my move. With trembling hands, I inserted the key into the keyhole of our old apartment, the one we once shared, where a daughter was born, where we spent so many years believing in the illusion of happiness. The sounds coming from the bedroom confirmed my worst fears even before I opened the door. I froze on the threshold, seeing in front of me a scene that my imagination had already drawn, but which I so desperately did not want to see in reality. In our bed, on the very sheets that I once chose myself in the store, John was lying with a woman I had never seen before. They were rushing around, hastily pulling on blankets, but it didn't matter anymore. "Callie!" John exclaimed, but he didn't even bother to put on a face of shame. He looked at me without embarrassment, without remorse, without even a shadow of regret. "What are you doing here?" I couldn't speak. I couldn't even breathe. I just stood there, feeling my world crumble, the ground fall away under my feet, my whole life, all my love, all my hopes turn to smoke. "Listen," he said in a cold, irritated voice, as if he was unbearably embarrassed that I had caught him at such a moment. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way, but let's be honest, Kelly. I am bored. You're always busy with your mother, always tired, always somewhere far away. It's exciting." His words cut deeper into me than any knife. I didn't say a word. She just turned around and left. The only possible plan was already forming in my head. I had to get rid of him. The divorce process was ugly, brutal, and dragged on for months of endless arguments, shouting, and accusations. John fought for every dollar, for every piece of furniture, for every detail that, in his opinion, belonged to him. He tried to squeeze everything he could out of this process, as if he didn't realize that he had destroyed not just his family, but his whole life. But in the end, we appeared before a judge, and our life together was turned into a simple accounting estimate: assets, accounts, real estate, distributed in cold numbers. But the hardest part was ahead of me. Custody of Sarah. At the age of 12, she was already old enough to have a voice in court, and when she said her words, I felt something inside me break, as if my heart was being squeezed in a vice. "I want to live with Dad," she said in a flat, confident voice. "I don't want to be around Grandma anymore. It's disgusting and depressing. And Mom is always trying to get me to help." I couldn't believe my ears. The judge nodded sympathetically, but his expression was indifferent. For him it was an ordinary case, another meeting, another broken family. He took into account John's higher income, his stability, the comfort he could provide for Sarah, and her obvious desire. In the end, John was awarded the right of primary custody. I was left with a house that no longer seemed cozy to me, but alien, more like a hospital than a family home. The first months after the divorce were unbearable. Time after time, I found myself walking through the house, pausing in the doorway of Sarah's empty room, waiting to hear her voice, her laughter, but there was only silence. But I clung to the weekend that was left to me like a lifeline. I tried to make the most of every minute with Sarah. We went to the movies, ate ice cream in the park, walked, chatted, watched movies, had late-night conversations, and even though it wasn't perfect, it couldn't replace mornings and evenings, everyday life, but it was something. I tried to convince myself that it was enough. But every time I escorted her back to John, when I closed the door behind her, remaining on the threshold of an empty house, I knew that I was losing more than just my marriage. I'm losing my daughter. Then, gradually, everything began to change, subtly, almost imperceptibly, but each time more painfully, like a crack that at first seems insignificant, and then turns into a gaping chasm. Sarah started canceling plans, rarely at first, for perfectly reasonable reasons. "Mom, I'm sorry, but I'm spending the night with a friend," or "Dad bought concert tickets, can I reschedule the visit?" I tried to be understanding. I didn't want to turn into that annoying, controlling mother who causes irritation by her mere presence. I wanted to be a cool mom who respects her daughter's personal space, but every cancellation felt like a knife stabbing into my stomach. And then the cancellations became more frequent, so sometimes weeks passed without her visits. I waited at the door, looking at my watch, checking my phone over and over again, hoping to see the familiar message: "Mom, I'm on my way," but instead the phone remained silent, the screen was blank, and the days passed one after another, turning into a monotonous routine in which there was no place for my girl. My calls were immediately redirected to voicemail, and my messages were met with monosyllabic responses, if at all. One Sunday, when Sarah canceled the meeting once again, without even bothering to suggest a new day, I could no longer sit idly by. I grabbed the phone and dialed her number. A beep. Second. Then there was a short beep, and a dry, mechanical voice said soullessly, "The caller cannot receive your call." I froze. She tried again. This time the voice said something else, cold, detached, cruel in its simplicity. "The number you dialed has blocked your calls." It took me a few seconds to realize the meaning of those words. Sarah blocked me. My hands trembled, my heart clenched, and my ears began to roar. I immediately dialed John's number. He answered right away, but his voice was irritated, dry, as if I had distracted him from something important. "What do you want, Kelly?" I swallowed the lump in my throat, trying to keep my voice calm, but my voice betrayed my panic anyway. "John, I can't reach Sarah. She blocked my number." "What's happening?" There was a long pause, and I heard his heavy sigh on the phone, as if he knew in advance that this conversation would one day take place. "Listen, Kelly," he finally spoke, and there was something like weariness in his voice. "Sarah doesn't want to talk to you right now. You need to respect that." "Respect?" I asked in disbelief. "John, she's my daughter." "She's human too, Kelly," he interrupted. "With your feelings, desires, and needs. And right now, she doesn't want to be around all this negativity at your house." "Negative?" I felt my throat go dry with rage. "I mean, illness, sadness, constant worries. Sarah needs stability. In a normal family." His words were like blades, stabbing deeper and deeper. "Normal?" "Yes, Kelly, normal." His voice was firm, as if he sincerely believed in his words. "Sarah sees Lisa as a mother now. She has a normal family life here. 2 parents. There are no sick relatives. No drama. Why can't you just let her be happy?" Something broke in my chest. I couldn't speak. Tears were streaming down my face, and I was grateful that John couldn't see me. "Listen," his voice suddenly became softer, almost sympathetic. "I know it's hard, but if Sarah doesn't want to see you right now, you need to respect that. Don't force her. It will only alienate her more." I wanted to scream, argue, demand my rights, remind him that this was my daughter, that I carried her under my heart, that I was always there for him, but some tiny, rational part of my brain whispered that he might be right. If I push her, if I force her, I could lose Sarah forever. My fingers loosened, the phone fell out of my hands and fell to the floor with a thud. I slid down, pressed my hands to my chest and burst into tears. My baby. My Sarah. She's not mine anymore. Someone else kissed her goodnight, helped her with her homework, and was there for me when I missed her. So I sat there, alone in the dark, until I heard faint footsteps. I looked up and saw my mother, her thin figure leaning on a walker, her face lined but full of anxiety. She could barely move, but she still found the strength to reach me. "Kelly," she called, and her voice was stronger than it had been in months. "What's wrong, honey?" I looked at her. The woman who had been my rock for so many years, who I had cared for, who I had saved, was now the one who saved me again. And I suddenly felt like a child seeking solace from his mother. "Oh, Mom," I sobbed, reaching for her hand. "I lost her. I lost my baby." Mom squeezed my fingers, and her touch, though weak, was filled with love. "No, Kelly," she said firmly. "You haven't lost her. She's just lost right now. but she'll find her way back to you." I closed my eyes, clutching her hand as if it held the last thread connecting me to what was left of my life. 14 years old. How amazing it is that time can both fly by unnoticed and drag on endlessly. Mom's condition improved a little over the years, slowly, almost imperceptibly, but it still got better. She regained some mobility, could walk with a walker, and her speech, albeit with difficulty, was no longer a complete set of incoherent sounds that she had once desperately tried to turn into words. However, caring for her remained a constant job, a daily routine that filled my life so much that I could no longer imagine what a day could be without reminders about taking medications, without scheduled procedures, without carefully observing her every move, as if I was afraid that the slightest mistake would lead to another catastrophe. When she died peacefully in her sleep, I felt both heartrending grief and, what was almost unbearable to admit, shameful relief. I'd been carrying this burden for so long, living between fear and caring for so long, that now, left without this daily struggle, I suddenly realized that I don't know how to fill the void that was left after it. Suddenly I was alone in this big, empty house. The silence was deafening. No more beeping medical equipment, no more strict medication schedules, no more therapy sessions, no more waking up at night from the faint call of Mom. Just me. 1. I wandered through the rooms filled with memories, touching the furniture she loved so much, the smooth surface of the kitchen table she sat at, the wallpaper in the living room that we chose together, unable to shake the feeling that I was about to hear her voice, see her smile, feel her light touch. And then suddenly my phone rang. I shuddered, as if someone had suddenly pulled me out of a dream, and looked at the screen. The number was unfamiliar, but the voice that sounded on the phone would have been recognizable to me anywhere, anytime, even after all these years. "Mom. This is Sarah." The voice that had once been a child's, sonorous one, now sounded different, lower, more confident, adult, and I instantly felt my heart pounding in my chest. I was hoping we could meet. To talk. We agreed to meet at a cafe in the city center. I arrived in advance, and while I was waiting, my hand was shaking around the coffee cup. I tried to imagine what she had become, how she had changed, and I tried to prepare myself for the fact that this conversation would not be easy. And so, the door opened, and I saw her. It took me a moment to realize that it was really Sarah. The awkward teenage gait disappeared, the childish features disappeared. Instead of them, a young woman stood in front of me, restrained, beautiful, confident. "Hi, Mom," she said, sliding into the seat across from me. We awkwardly exchanged a few phrases, formally, cautiously, as if we were relearning how to talk to each other. She initiated me into her life, told me about her work in marketing, about her hobbies, about her friends, and for a moment it seemed to me that this gap between us could be overcome, that I could become a part of her life again. And then she took an envelope out of her purse and put it in front of me. "Here's the invitation." My heart was filled with joy, and at the same time with bitterness. My little girl is getting married. And I missed so many moments in her life. "Oh, Sarah, that's great news." I smiled, feeling tears welling up in my eyes. "I'm so happy for you. Listen, if you need help with expenses." She cut me off abruptly, raising her palm. "Actually, Mom, that's why I wanted to meet." I felt my stomach tighten as she leaned forward and lowered her voice. "I wanted to talk about my grandmother's inheritance. About the house. About her savings. I need them." I felt like I had been hit. "I'm sorry." "What?" "Listen, Mom," she said in an even, almost businesslike tone, in which there was neither regret nor doubt. "This house is in a great neighborhood. It's worth a fortune. After the wedding, Jake and I want to live there, start our family." Anger boiled up inside me. "Sarah," I exhaled slowly, trying to control myself. "You haven't been in this house in over 10 years. You said you hated him." You called it a grave. She waved her hand dismissively, as if it didn't matter at all. I was a child, Mom. Then I grew up. Times have changed. And let's face it, I'm Grandma's only granddaughter. She would like me to have it. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Would you like to have it? I shook my head, feeling the blood rush to my face. Sarah, you didn't even come to her funeral. You haven't called or texted me in years. It's ancient history. She waved her hand sharply, as if she were talking about something insignificant. The point is, this house should be mine. I clenched my fists under the table, trying not to explode with anger. Do you think you deserve him? Do you think you have a right to it? I looked straight into her eyes, seeing in them something that I was afraid to admit: calculation, selfishness, composure. You didn't do anything for Grandma. You didn't even lift a finger to help. When she was sick, when I sacrificed everything to take care of her, you weren't there. I gave my life to take care of her. And now you think you can just come and take her house? Sarah's face hardened. Okay, she said icily. If you want to play like that, I will sue. I'll get what's rightfully mine. She stood up abruptly and grabbed the wedding invitation from the table, as if she regretted handing it to him at all. You know what? Forget. You're not invited to the wedding. I don't need your negativity there. She paused, gave me a contemptuous look, and added, and I don't need your permission to take what belongs to me. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't even breathe. I just watched my daughter, my Sarah, turn around and walk away, and I realized that I was losing her for the second time. When Sarah ran out of the cafe, leaving me alone at a table in front of which one of the most painful conversations in my life was unfolding a moment ago, I did not follow her, did not call out, did not try to stop her. I just sat staring into the void, unable to believe that the man I was carrying under my heart I raised, protected, loved, and turned into this cold, calculating stranger, for whom I was just an obstacle on the way to money and the house she once despised. The days after that disastrous encounter were a blur. I was torn between outbursts of rage, piercing grief, and a devastating, overwhelming emptiness, as if I no longer existed, as if I had lost not only my daughter, but also a part of myself. But when the dust settled, when I exhaled and looked at it all from the outside, I realized something unexpected, almost paradoxical. I felt relieved. The weight of hope that had been hanging on my shoulders for years shackled my heart, poisoned every thought, and dissolved, leaving behind a strange sense of peace. I no longer waited. I did not yearn for reconciliation. I did not torment myself with questions about what I had done wrong, where I had made a mistake. I did everything I could. I've been a mother for as many years as I've been allowed. I didn't go to Sarah's wedding. I didn't send a gift. I didn't write a postcard. I didn't remind her of my existence. I didn't humiliate myself by trying to regain at least a tiny piece of my place in her life. Instead, I spent that day volunteering at a local animal shelter, finding solace in the unconditional love of abandoned pets, in the simple, honest existence of those who don't know how to betray. It seemed appropriate. But a few days later, when the initial shock subsided, curiosity began to stir in me, and I found myself scrolling through Sarah's social media, almost automatically, not realizing why I was doing this, just trying to take a look at her life from afar, at what now fills her days, at who she has become. Without me. There she was, radiant, in a snow-white dress, with a perfect smile, looking at her new husband with an expression of happiness that I hadn't seen on her face in many years. For a moment, my heart was squeezed by the pain of loss, from the thought of what could have been if everything had turned out differently, if time had not taken away my right to be by my side at such moments. But then I saw the post. A long, confused stream of words, full of resentment, self-pity, and lies. She wrote about an abusive mother who refused to come to the wedding, who left her daughter for her own pride, who stubbornly holds on to her legitimate inheritance, guided only by anger and a thirst for control. I reread this post twice, amazed by the sheer audacity of her words, how easily she reshaped reality, painted herself as a victim, and exposed me as a heartless monster. Part of me wanted to comment, to write the truth, to say that it wasn't me who gave up on her, but she on me, that I'd been trying for years to keep at least a faint thread between us. But what was the point? The people who mattered, those who saw me taking care of my mom day after day, who knew what I was going through, understood the truth. And those who based their opinions on a stranger's post on social media hardly bothered me. A week later, my cousin Jeannie called me. "Kelly," she said, and her voice was a mixture of anger and concern. "I thought you should know. Sarah says she's going to sue you for your mom's estate." I sighed, not surprised, just tired. "Let him try," I said calmly. "That's all." Jeannie continued, clearly flustered. "Apparently she's already talked to a lawyer. He told her she had no chance. Your mom left everything to you. Everything is clear in the will, there are no loopholes." I couldn't help but chuckle. Of course, Mom took care of everything. She was always practical. "Thanks for letting me know, Jeannie," I said, feeling the weight that had been on my shoulders disappear completely. "But honestly, I don't care what Sarah does anymore. She made her choice." There was a pause on the other end of the line, then Jeannie said softly, "I'm proud of you, Kelly. After everything you've been through, you deserve peace." When I hung up the phone, I looked around the house that was once my mom's house, and now it's mine. Every corner held memories, some painful, some beautiful, but for the first time in many years, I felt like I could breathe here. I went to the window overlooking the garden, which my mother loved so much. He's overgrown in recent years, overgrown just like me, hidden under layers of past injuries, pain, and shattered hopes, but I've seen his potential. Maybe it's time to give him back his life. As I stood there in my garden, amidst the awakening life inspired by the tenderness of the passing spring, planning my next trip to the garden center, thinking about what flowers could complement the lush rose bushes that my mother once loved so much, it suddenly dawned on me, my whole life revolved around Sarah, around pain, expectation, the hope of reconciliation that had been poisoning my thoughts for years, but now, finally, this pain began to subside, dissipating like a morning mist under the first rays of the sun, leaving behind not an emptiness, but an amazing, quiet, almost magical calm. But that didn't mean my story was over. The garden was in full bloom when the bell rang. I have spent the last few months completely dedicating myself to his recovery, finding solace in the simple act of caring for life, in painstaking work that did not require words, did not require excuses, but instead gave clarity, peace, and a sense of something real, tangible. The rose bushes that my mother loved so much were just beginning to bloom, their rich fragrance filling the air as I carefully pruned them with scissors, intently studying each new sprout. My phone rang in my pocket. The number was unfamiliar. I hardly answered, having already gotten used to the fact that now my personal space is not violated by people from the past, but something inside me, some inner voice that could not be ignored, made me press the green button. "Hi, Mom," the voice was hoarse, choked, as if after long tears. "Mom, I need your help." I froze, the scissors still clenched in my hand. "Sarah?" I said slowly, feeling something elusive rise in my chest, a mixture of anxiety, old pain, and an instinctive desire to protect. "What happened?" There was a strangled sob on the other end of the phone. I'm pregnant," she gasped in a trembling voice, and then, before I could process the word, she hurriedly added, "And Jake and I fight all the time. He says I'm being selfish, that I should have planned better, but Mom, I'm scared, I need money, you have to help me, you can't leave your grandson with nothing." I listened in silence as she spoke, her voice shifting from anxious to demanding, and then to openly accusing. "You left me, Mom, you didn't even try to contact me, you never fought for me, and now you're going to leave your grandson too?" Something inside me snapped. But not out of anger. "It's about unshakable, quiet determination. Sarah, I said in a flat voice, calm and firm, not allowing a single emotion to break through. That's enough. She stopped talking, probably in shock that I had interrupted her. You say I left you, but that's a lie, I continued, holding the phone tighter than I should have. I've never left you. I paid alimony without missing a pass. I called, wrote, and emailed. But you blocked my number. You chose your stepmother. You made your decisions, and I respected them, even when they broke my heart. But, Mom. No, Sarah, I interrupted again, not allowing myself to flinch. I'm not done yet. There was a tense silence on the other end of the line. You're an adult now. You're going to be a mother yourself. It's time for you to take responsibility for your choices and your life. I'm not your bank. I'm not your safety cushion. And I won't let you be manipulated by lies and guilt. I could hear her heavy breathing, uneven, ragged, full of unspoken words. If you need help, go to your father and Lisa. They're your real family. Remember who you chose. I've come to terms with it. Now you have to accept the consequences of your choice. You can't do that. She exploded, her voice trembled with indignation, anger, horror, as if for the first time she realized that she could hear me say no. I'm your daughter. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, letting the scent of roses permeate my lungs, and then answered with a slight sadness. Yes, you are my daughter. And I will always love the little girl that you were. But I do not know the woman you have become. And I don't think I want to know. I paused, and then calmly added, Goodbye, Sarah. I wish you and your child all the best. But please don't call me again. I pressed the end of call button without giving her a chance to answer. The silence that followed was almost frightening. My hand was shaking slightly as I put the phone down for a moment, realizing the weight of what had just happened. And then, slowly but inevitably, I felt something inside me rise, filling my chest with something light, warm, liberating. The last ties that bound me to my painful past were severed. The last, what if, finally rested in its place. I looked around, at the garden, at the house, at the space that now completely belonged to me, a space not filled with losses and regrets, but determined by my own decisions, my own life. I picked up the scissors again and turned to the rose bush. There was still a lot to do. There was still a lot of beauty to cultivate. And for the first time in many years, I felt truly, completely free.